After breaking down the matchup between the Georgia offense and the Alabama defense yesterday, I'm back with part 2 of my deep dive preview of this massive top 5 matchup between the Georgia Bulldogs and the Alabama Crimson Tide. This time with a breakdown of the matchup between the explosive Alabama offense and the dominant Georgia defense. How do the Dogs contain Jalen Milroe and that explosive Alabama offense? Well, let's dive in.
We just stepped on their face with a hobnail boot and broke their nose. We just crushed their face.
What's up, guys? I'm Tyler, and this is the Glory UGA podcast brought to you by our great friends at MyBookie. And this is a deep dive preview, part 2 of a deep dive preview of this Georgia-Alabama game. So if you're a diehard Georgia fan and you're looking for content designed for you, the most diehard Georgia fans out there, this is the channel for you. Make sure to subscribe right now, watch the videos, like the videos, comment, and most importantly, check out the Glory UGA podcast, the audio side of things, wherever you get your podcast for a whole lot more coverage of Georgia football just like this. But all right, guys, let's go ahead and dive into part 2 of this deep dive breakdown of this massive top 5 showdown between Georgia and Alabama. I did the Georgia offense versus the Alabama defense yesterday. Today, we're flipping things over and we're taking a look at the matchup between the Georgia defense and the explosive Alabama offense. And we're going to use the same format that I used yesterday, our countdown format. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I got 5 names to know, 4 stats that matter, 3 scheme notes, 2 keys to the matchup, and finally, 1 prediction to wrap things up. But let's dive in, guys, with 5 names to know on this Alabama offense. We got to start with Jalen Milroe, guys. We'd be remiss if we started anywhere else. This guy is dynamic. He's explosive. Any of those types of adjectives, throw his way. He deserves them. But at the same time, he's also very much an all-or-nothing quarterback. He will hit the explosive plays, generate a ton of explosive plays with creativity, with arm strength, with just pure raw athleticism. But he's also prone to the, let's be kind here and say, the questionable decision. Okay, he will make mistakes. He will take sacks. He hasn't improved much in that regard. He has improved as a passer. He's more proficient in the short to intermediate range than he was a year ago. Hasn't really played much of a defense with a pulse, but he's more proficient in that regard than he was a year ago. He has progressed there, but he's still taking some bad sacks, did against South Florida, and that's just a part of his game right now. He's still trying to learn how to play the quarterback position, but he is the rare quarterback. Even though he is more proficient throwing the football in the short to intermediate range this year, he is the rare quarterback that is still more proficient throwing the football vertically down the field. You don't see that very often. The guy has an absolute howitzer of an arm. It's absurd, man. The ball coming off his hands is a beautiful sight to see. So as a Georgia fan, I don't like that sight, but man, like as just someone who appreciates football, it looks gorgeous, man. I mean, he's got a rocket launcher there. There's no part of the field that he cannot reach with that arm. There's no throw that he cannot make because of lack of arm strength. Now, accuracy, touch, those things still sometimes elude him, but pushing the ball vertically down the field, fitting the ball in the tight windows, this guy has as good of an arm as any quarterback that Georgia will face all year. So from a raw physical standpoint, he is the best physical specimen that Georgia will play at quarterback all year, hands down. There's nobody out there on our schedule. I don't know if there's a better physical specimen at quarterback in the entire country. But the issue with Jalen Milroe, and he's getting better. He is getting better. I'll give him that. But he's still very much learning how to play quarterback. I do think Kalen DeBoer and this offensive staff that has always had success offensively, really wherever they've been, will get him there eventually. But it's still very early in this year, all right? They've only played 3 games. Yes, they had the bye week this week just like we've had, but he's still very much learning how to play that quarterback position. He still does not process at a high level. When he gets pressure in his face, he still starts to revert back to some old habits. He's prone to panicking and making a poor decision here and there, whether that's taking a sack, putting a ball into harm's way, just doing things that you would not advise a quarterback to do. Very ill-advised decision-making at times. But he also has that elite playmaking ability that when things do break down and he does start to panic, sometimes he can get out of it. Even if he's panicking and he just takes off and runs, sometimes it works out because he is just that kind of elite athlete, but also sometimes it does not work out. But his legs are an incredible threat, man. I mean, I still think his legs, as strong as his arm is, his legs are what concern me the most in this game. I think they have to if you're a defensive coordinator. And they use him in a variety of ways. They use him in the design QB run game, and it's not just like old school design, like QB zone read. They will run quarterback counter. They'll run quarterback draw. They'll run quarterback power sweep with him. They'll run the zone read stuff. They'll run the bash action. They'll do a bunch of different things with the design QB run game. It is extensive, and they will try to feature him in the run game. If they feel like this game's getting tight and they need a first down, they will go to Jalen Milroe on the ground. They have shown that through the first 3 games of this season. But it's not just the design QB run game. The scramble game, the creativity, he is maybe more dangerous when things break down and you're trying to cover guys down the field and he just takes off, he sees a seam, he just busts through it. That might be where he is most dangerous. So his legs are an incredible threat. He's already got 6 rushing touchdowns on the year, accounted for 14 total touchdowns through 3 games, which has put him firmly in the Heisman Trophy race. I mean, he was already in the race coming into the year, but now, I mean, he has certainly moved up those rankings when it comes to Heisman Trophy standing. So Jalen Milroe, dynamic athlete, not a finished product by any stretch of the imagination, not completely polished, more polished than he was a year ago. I'll give him that. But he's just a dynamic playmaker, man. He is a playmaker. He is the personification of a playmaker at the college football level. So you got to be able to account for him. If you can't account for Jalen Milroe, you have no chance. You simply have no chance. So we have to start there. Next up, well, who's he throwing to this year? Their receiving core is not as dynamic as it was a year ago. And last year, it wasn't nearly as dynamic as it had been, 3, 4, 5 years prior to that, when you have guys like Devontae Smith winning a Heisman Trophy, Jalen Waddle, the Henry Ruggs of the world, Jerry Jeudy's of the world. They didn't have guys like that last year, but Isaiah Bond and Jermaine Burton were a better duo than what they have to work with this year. But the top threat right now, the guy who has already emerged through 3 games as the top threat for Jalen Milroe in the passing game, is a true freshman, Ryan Williams. So basically any other year, and when you're talking about recruiting out of the high school ranks, would have almost certainly been the number 1 receiver in the country, but he just so happened to be in the same class as Jeremiah Smith at Ohio State and Cam Coleman, who's now at Auburn. Both those guys are just, they're freaks, man. And look, Ryan Williams is a freak in his own right. He's just maybe not quite at that level, like one tiny notch below those guys. And I don't know if you've heard, if you happen to have watched any Alabama game this year, you have to have heard because they can't stop telling you, he's only 17 years old. So he is a young true freshman, 6 foot 175. He is a small guy. He is very slight of frame. And we'll come back to that a little bit later on. But that does not mean he cannot make plays. He is a playmaker for them. He's got 10 catches on the year for 285 yards. I am not a math guy. Those of you who know me, who've been around this podcast for a long time, you know that. So I'm not prone to doing high-level math, but even I can do this math. That comes out to 28.5 yards per catch. Is that good? I think that's pretty good, right? That is an explosive playmaker. In fact, he's the only receiver on the Alabama roster right now that has double-digit receptions, right? Jeremy Bernard, the transfer from Washington, who's also a good receiver in his own right, he has 8. And his 285 yards receiving are more than double the next closest receiver, which again is Jeremy Bernard, who has 125 yards receiving. So he has 160 yards more receiving than the next closest receiver, again, more than double. He is a deep threat. He is a threat to run past your corners, to get lost back there. You have to play with integrity in the back end. We cannot blow coverages, guys, against Alabama. If we blow coverages against them, they will make us pay. Milroe can reach any part of the field with that arm, and you got guys like Ryan Williams that if they're running free, they're explosive, man. And that's what's happened early this year. Now, I will say, he is a playmaker. He's a dynamic athlete. All those things are true. A lot of the plays that he has made this year, like some of those more explosive touchdowns, have been him just running wide open, no one around him, because teams are just turning him loose. Not intentionally, they're blowing assignments, right? They're blowing coverages, and he's just running loose. Now, there have been a couple plays where he'll take a little hitch, and the catch and run is also that's a really strong part of his game. He can do that too. He's done that from time to time, but there's also been a number of times where he's just running wide open because they turn him loose. So Georgia cannot do that. But this guy is a dynamic playmaking threat at the receiver position as a true freshman. Next up, let's go from the skill positions to the big uglies up front. Caden Proctor, you guys all know that name. Former, highly hyped 5-star coming out of high school a year ago. He's now a sophomore. Came into college last year at Alabama with massive expectations. And quite honestly, he didn't live up to them. Even if you're an Alabama fan, you found this video, you got to be real, man. Be real with yourself. Be honest. You know, you probably screamed at him last year yourself. He did not live up to those expectations a year ago. I did not watch every second of every Bama game during the season last year. I went back and did that during the offseason to prepare for this game. And my humble opinion, I think that Caden Proctor, as a true freshman, and he was a true freshman, there's context there. You don't expect true freshmen to be incredible right away, but those kind of were the expectations for him. I think he was the worst offensive lineman Alabama had last year. And I honestly don't think it was particularly close. I think it was pretty clear cut for me. He had a lot of trouble with speed rushers off the edge. He's playing left tackle for them. I personally don't think he's a true left tackle. I really don't. I don't think he has the athleticism, the footwork, even necessarily the length out there. I think he's more of a right tackle, but hey, they want to play him at left tackle. That's fine. That's where he's been playing. He was a sieve at times last year, guys. Let's just be real. He absolutely was. Did he get better as the season went on? Yeah, he did, but at no point was he even a good pass protector for them. Run game, he was better. Pass protection, he had issues last year. And he's missed time early this year. He's come back. He played against Wisconsin. He's looking better when he's been out there. I will give him that. But I still do, guys. I haven't seen enough this year to completely absolve him of any sort of questions when it comes to his speed rush. I still think that he's vulnerable to guys that have explosiveness off the edge. And I don't know if you've watched Georgia play this year, which I know you have. I don't know, a guy like Jalen Walker, I think one of the more explosive pass rushers in the entire country, could certainly have some success against Caden Proctor if we can get that matchup schemed one-on-one. Michael Williams coming back healthy this week. Looks like he'll be back this week. We want to knock on wood there. What version of Michael Williams we get, we don't really know, but him being back, he's a guy that if remotely healthy can also have some success off the edge against Caden Proctor. Damon Wilson Jr., again, another pass rusher, especially on third downs. I think as a dynamic, explosive edge rusher can have success against Caden Proctor. So in the run game, he's a bruiser. He can move you, but I do think that he can be a liability at times in pass pro, and I think Georgia has the type of pass rushers that can give him issues. Next up, let's go back to the skill positions. Let's go Jam Miller, who is a junior now. He is their leading rusher through the first 3 games of the year, 29 carries for 265 yards. That comes out to 9.1 yards per carry, and that is going to be a part of the theme that we're going to talk about later on when we get to some of the other segments here. This Alabama offense is incredibly explosive. Run game, pass game, they are explosive. And he's not a small guy. He's a short guy. He's one of those guys. He's 5'10", 220. He's short-ish but thick. This guy can run with power. He's got solid speed, not like a massive home run threat, but he's got good enough speed to take the distance if you give him a lane. He's got really good vision. He's got good short area quickness. He's got good hands out of the backfield. He's a good player for them, and he is their leading rusher through the first 3 games of the year. And our final player to know is part 2 of Alabama's 1-2 punch at the running back position. That's going to be Justice Haynes. Yes, we all know the Justice Haynes story. His dad, Ron Haynes, Georgia guy. He was a legacy recruit, ends up spurning the home state Bulldogs. His dad's alma mater, goes to Alabama. We all know how that turned out. He's a sophomore now, didn't play a ton last year. He's similar in size, actually in skill set. There's a lot of similarities between Jam Miller and Justice Haynes. They're very much kind of the same back, 5'11", 210, not quite as big as Jam Miller, not quite as thick, but a thick guy in his own right. 19 carries, 165 yards in the year. Also himself, 8.7 yards per rush. Now, I know you see 8.7 yards per rush. Man, what an explosive back. Yeah, okay, but think about who they played. South Florida, Western Kentucky, Wisconsin doesn't have anybody that would even sniff Georgia's defensive roster. They just simply would not. So there's that context there. And here's what I say about Justice Haynes. I don't think he's an elite athlete. I don't think he's got great speed. He's got average speed. He's good in the short area. I think he's quicker than he is fast. He's got some deceptive power. He's got good hands out of the backfield. But here's what I'll say about both those running backs. I think they're good. I'm not trying to say that Alabama doesn't have good running backs. It's Alabama. Of course they have good running backs. I just don't think that Jan Miller and Justice Haynes are special. I think that they are good. They are good running backs. And that's all you really need when you have a quarterback like Jalen Milroe, who creates so much space in the run game because teams have to account for him. He gives them the numbers edge in the box almost every single snap. And if teams try to counter that by bringing guys in the box, now you got one on the outside and you got explosive receivers. You got a guy that is very proficient throwing the ball down the field. Throws a gorgeous deep ball. He's tough to defend, and he creates room for these running backs to operate. On their own, I don't think those guys are elite. I think Georgia's running backs are clearly better, in my opinion. Now, you can call me a homer if you want, but I think Trevor Etienne, Nate Frazier, I know he's young. I think both those guys are far more explosive than Jan Miller and Justice Haynes, but they're a good 1-2 punch, and they work really well in combination with Jalen Milroe. So there you go. There you go. That's the first segment. 5 players to know on this Alabama offense. Let's move on to 4 stats that matter. Kind of paint the picture of this Alabama offense. The first thing we got to talk about, guys, is how explosive this Alabama offense is. That is the name of the game for this Alabama offense in 2024 under Kalen DeBoer, and it kind of was last year. I told you guys, Jalen Milroe is kind of an all-or-nothing quarterback. He either makes the huge play or makes kind of a debilitating play. Well, since he's their quarterback, he's their leader in offense, their offense kind of takes on that itself. Like, this offense at large is kind of like all or nothing in a lot of ways. And to illustrate that, let's go with this first stat. They got 21 touchdown drives through the first 3 games. 14 of them, 67% of their touchdown drives through the first 3 games have been 4 plays or less. 8 of their 21 touchdown drives through the first 3 games, nearly 40% of those touchdown drives have been 2 plays or less. This Alabama offense is not churning out long, sustained drives. Have they done that from time to time? Yeah, there's a couple drives they've done that. But by and large, guys, they are hitting explosive plays. We're talking 2 plays, touchdown, 3 plays, touchdown, 4 plays, touchdown. You're not seeing long, sustained drives from this Alabama offense, okay? That is something that Georgia has to figure out a way to limit. We'll come back to that a little bit later. But this offense is explosive. That's how they're putting points up. They're generating an insane number of explosive plays. Very quick strike team thus far in the 2024 season. Now, this next stat, not as good for Alabama. That first one, hey, if you're an Alabama fan, you like that. This one, maybe not as much. They are 11th in the SEC in sacks allowed. They're giving up 2 sacks a game. If you go back and watch the South Florida game, they should have, they gave up 3 sacks in the game. There should have been a lot more than 3 sacks surrendered. But what happened was, instead of Jalen Milroe getting sacked, they would just tackle the defender. Their tackles were tackling defenders because they were getting whipped. They're getting absolutely whipped. So they had like 5 or 6 holding calls. All those would have been sacks. Almost certainly. Or the vast majority of them would have been sacks. So 3 sacks, not great, but that doesn't really tell the story of that game. They have had issues protecting Jalen Milroe. Now, Jalen Milroe, dynamic athlete, he's been able, especially when you're playing a team like South Florida, it just doesn't have the type of players that can really give you issues on the defensive side of the ball and can't really match his athleticism. He's been able to escape and create plays and do his thing. But against the Georgia defense, that, let's be real, guys, has been dominant through 3 games. Say what you want about Kentucky's offense, fine, fair. Now, if you want to criticize Clemson's offense coming into the year, fair, I get that. And it looked a lot the same in week 1 against Georgia. But what has that Clemson offense done since then? They are torching defense. Now, you can say, well, the competition has been great. I don't care, man. They're putting up 60-plus points. That's what they're doing right now. So Georgia's defense held them to 3 points, okay? So different kind of athletes on the defensive side of the ball. So that's something that Alabama is going to have to figure out. Now, I will say against South Florida, got to be fair here, Caden Proctor did not play in that game. Wilkin Formby was the guy that more than anyone was getting whipped by South Florida. I mean, they were just torching that guy. I mean, you kind of felt bad for him at times. Like, it was just a bad look. Now, Caden Proctor comes back. Elijah Pritchett's going to right tackle. So Formby's not playing as much. I think he only played 17 snaps against Wisconsin in week 3. A lot of those were in garbage time. Okay, so that will certainly help things. But still, I'm telling you, Caden Proctor is not an elite pass protector. Elijah Pritchett, not really an elite pass protector. They do have issues there. And one thing Jalen Milroe will do, guys, he contributes to this as well. He will hold the ball way too long. Again, he doesn't process super well. If his number one read's not there, a lot of times, especially if there's pressure, he doesn't get off that first read and try to go to the second, third read. He's just waiting for that first guy to get open, and he will take those sacks. He will take those sacks. He did it last year a lot, and he's done it so far again this year. All right, the third stat that matters. Jalen Milroe's passing grade versus the blitz compared to his passing grade when he's not blitzed is significantly lower than it is when he's not blitzed. Now, that's typically the case for most quarterbacks, not all quarterbacks. Carson Beck is actually really good against the blitz. At least he has been for most of his career at Georgia. We know the Kentucky game, not a good look. We have to own that. But Jalen Milroe's passing grade, and according to PFF, which, hey, I always say, guys, take with a grain of salt. I like their quantitative stuff, and they do a really good job of the quantitative stuff. The qualitative stuff on PFF, it's hit or miss because there's not much transparency there. So be skeptical. That's fair. Be skeptical here. But according to PFF's grades, Jalen Milroe's passing grade is 82.2 when he's not blitzed. When he's blitzed, that drops to 64.2. That's a pretty precipitous drop, guys. Again, Jalen Milroe, when he's pressured, when he's blitzed, he starts to panic, all right? He's not a great processor. Now, but here's the caveat here. So his passing grade drops a lot when you blitz him. So what does that say? It says blitz him, right? Come after him. Bring the pressure after this guy. But here's the catch. His highest run grade also happens to come versus the blitz. So it's kind of a catch-22 here. You want to blitz him because his passing grade drops tremendously when he's blitzed. But you got to be careful because when you blitz him, he's also liable to take off and gut you because now you've got guys in the backfield and there's no one there. And if he can break through that first wave of defenders that are coming after him, he's got room, man. And he is a thoroughbred horse out there when he gets loose. That dude is hard to stop. He's hard to catch. That's for sure, man. So what does that tell us? It tells us, yeah, we do need to blitz him. But when you blitz him, you need to be disciplined in how you do that and have a plan and follow that plan. You cannot go freelance out there against Jalen Milroe. If you do, that's a recipe for disaster. He will gut you. That's what will happen, okay? So be disciplined, rush a passer, be disciplined, maintain pass rush lane integrity. You got to be careful there, guys. If you're an edge rusher, you got to be careful to not try to dip inside, okay, unless you have a stunt called. If you're dipping inside, you're playing into his hands, man. He's going to see that, and he's going to not hesitate. He's going to take off, and he is going to pick up big yards. He'll move the chains on third and long. He will do it, guys. I'm telling you, I've seen it time and time again. So it's a fine line. It's a delicate balance, but you got to come after him, and you also have to be careful and disciplined when you do it. So tough, but we got to find a way to make that happen. And then the final stat that matters here, we all know that Georgia, if you're a Georgia fan, you obviously have paid attention to this. You've seen this. We've talked about it here on the show. We have been one of the most penalized teams in the country. It's not been acceptable. We got to do a better job of that. That's very uncharacteristic of a Kirby Smart football team. We got to get that under control. But Alabama has also had very similar issues with penalties this year. They are 109th nationally through 3 games in penalty yards per game. So that is something to watch. This is a team that is prone to committing penalties. And I think if you try to, again, it goes back to pressure. If you pressure Milroe, you can get some holding calls. I think those tackles have issues at times, guys. They will hold you, all right? Defensively, they're aggressive. There might be some pass interference. They make mistakes. So that's something that can put them behind the chains. We'll get that a little bit later on. If you can get Alabama behind the chains, that is going to work to Georgia's advantage. And they might do it to themselves with that penalty yardage situation that they've dealt with through the first 3 weeks of the season. All right, moving along here. Let's go to our 3 scheme notes. This kind of goes back to what we were just talking about with Jalen Milroe's passing grade versus the blitz. You've got to come after him. You cannot be passive. If you go back to the SEC Championship game a year ago, Georgia was far too passive in the first half in how we approached defending Jalen Milroe. There were many times that we were dedicating 2 spies. We had 2 defenders mirroring Jalen Milroe. And let's just be real, guys. Let's call it what it is. Our defensive staff, Kirby Smart, we were scared to death of what Jalen Milroe could do with his legs. And I get it. I understand. I just told you earlier that my biggest concern with this Alabama offense is still Jalen Milroe's legs. But you can't let that cause you to play scared. That's what happened with the Georgia defense in the first half last year. We allowed them to get out to a 17-7 halftime lead, and that ultimately proved to be too much to overcome. In the second half, they didn't have nearly as much success against the Georgia defense. Why? Because at halftime, we finally made the adjustment and said, we can't do this. We can't just sit back and let this man operate. We came after him. We pressured him. We had a lot more success. We flustered him. All right, and the Alabama offense was not the same offense in the second half as it was in the first half. If you don't blitz him, guys, again, he's not the most proficient passer in the world in the short to intermediate range. Still not. But if you give any quarterback all day to sit back there unmolested, especially a quarterback as physically gifted as Jalen Milroe, he's going to find someone. You saw that with Isaiah Bond on that. Still controversial. I still think it wasn't a catch. It's fine. Bama fans will disagree with me. It's whatever. But he had all day back there, man. He's got all day. He'll find somebody eventually. If he doesn't find someone, he'll just take off, okay? And yeah, you got 2 spies on him. Cool. Well, that didn't do the job in the first half last year. It simply did not. What was much more effective is pressuring him, having one guy, when he breaks contain, you trigger right away. We did that against Kentucky late in the fourth quarter against Brock Vandagriff, and we had success doing that when we mounted that comeback and were able to hold them off and win that game narrowly, but win the game nonetheless, okay? You can't be scared to blitz him. You just have to be smart about how you do it, okay? Now, here's how I would do it. Now, you got to be different. You got to bring pressure from different angles. You can't be too predictable. But I would dial up a lot of interior pressures, okay? Because if you get pressure in Jalen Milroe's face, it will flush him, okay? One of the things he likes to, he did this a lot last year. When he scrambled, he liked to step up into the pocket and scramble from the interior. Now, he can scramble from the outside, from the edges too. Don't get me wrong, he can do that, but he really likes to step up in the pocket and scramble up the field through the middle of your defense. You cannot allow him to do that. Cannot allow him to do that. You got to make him play left-handed. So bring interior pressure, push the pocket in his face, flush him out of the pocket, and then what do? Now you got the edges? Well, you stunt around the edges, okay? You twist around the edges, and you have someone sitting there waiting for Jalen Milroe. I think that's a very strong strategy when you're trying to bring pressure, trying to figure out how do I manufacture pressure against Jalen Milroe, but also be safe and not allow him to kill us with his legs when we do bring pressure. I think that's how you do it. Again, you can't do it every single time. You can't be that predictable. But I think I would bring a heavy dose of interior pressure with twists and stunts around the edge to contain him when he's flushed out of the pocket. Basically, flush him right into the guys that we've twisted to the edges there. That's how I would approach that from a pressure standpoint. Second scheme note here. Press their wide receivers on the outside. Ryan Williams is explosive. I understand, guys. It's football 101. I get it. If you press somebody at the line of scrimmage and they're an explosive playmaker and they're able to get off that press coverage, well, now you're in trouble because now they've got you stacked, right? And they can hurt you down the field. I understand how that happens, but I think you've got to take your risk there. You got to play the odds. And here's the thing, coming back to what we talked about with Ryan Williams. The guy's explosive. He's their best receiver. He's their guy. He's their explosive third receiver right now. They have a couple other guys that can create explosive plays. Jeremy Menard is capable, but he's not as explosive as Ryan Williams. Williams has been that guy through the first 3 games of the year. But Ryan Williams is small. He's 6 foot, 175 pounds. Ryan Williams is inexperienced. Does he have a lot of experience getting off press coverage like that against the type of cornerbacks that Georgia has? No, he doesn't. He's also young. Yeah, he's 17, right? 17-year-old trying to get off press coverage from a guy like Dalen Everett, a veteran, third-year guy. I don't know, man. I like Georgia's odds there. I think you have to disrupt their timing, get in his face, mess with his confidence, get in his head, and beat him up on the outside. Fairly, right? Let's not take cheap shots, but be physical with him on the outside. I think that's how you take him out of the game. Now, will you give a shot here or there if you do that? Probably. But I think by and large, if you do that, I think that you're going to have a lot of success at the end of the day, all right? I don't think you can just sit back in a soft zone. He'll run right by you. I don't like that strategy. I don't want to be passive against Alabama. We were way too passive last year. I want to bring pressure. I want to get in their face, play old school, Kirby Smart, press man coverage on the outside. Now, do we want to play straight up man? We'll get to that next here, but you got to press their wide receivers, all right? But speaking of a coverage from that standpoint, man coverage, straight up man coverage like man under or 2-man, all those cover 1 stuff, that's a very risky proposition against an Alabama offense with Jalen Milroe at the helm, at the quarterback position. Because again, as we've laid out many times today, the guy is a dynamic athlete. If he sees single coverage and like man coverage where DBs are turning their backs and running the receivers, he's going to take off. And he'll get 20 yards, guys, because before you can see that, he's picked up 15, 20 yards. And then you turn around and now it's a massive play for them, right? And he might bust one for 30, 40, 50, 60 yards if you do that. So I do not love the idea of old school, like cover one, two man under. I don't love that stuff, okay? I don't want you to consistently have to turn your backs to Jalen Milroe. I don't think that's a recipe for success. Now, zone coverage, I do think I'd run a fair amount of zone coverage against him, but here's what I do. Kirby Smart, let's do the matchup zone stuff, okay? I like a lot of cover 3, cover 6. If you want the single high stuff, if you want to get some more, if you want to get extra body down in the box to try to slow down the run game, Jalen Milroe's design QB run stuff, try to take back the numbers there. And if you have success with that, if you have success defending the run without having to do that, well, just run some cover 7 stuff. It's all matchup zone, right? And Kirby Smart, we employ that very heavily. Nick Saban did that a lot. That's kind of what they've done. So I think that's the recipe here. You play the man coverage on the outside, but you have to be careful to not be playing, like turning your back and running all across the field. Because if you do that, Jalen Milroe will take off, and like I said earlier, he will gut you. Straight man is just tough with Milroe. So you have to mix up the looks there. Again, as a guy who doesn't process that well, when you play man coverage, like straight up man coverage, you kind of play into his hands because the reads aren't that hard for him. He's just like, okay, he sees a guy running down the field in single coverage, like, oh, okay, I see this guy in single coverage. He's got to step on the DB, so I'm just going to throw it vertically down the field. You're not making him really go through progressions and go through reads. You play some zone stuff, all of a sudden now you're making him go through those progressions. You're making him think more, and as a guy who's still learning how to play that position, I think that also could force him into some mistakes. So I think you have to be very careful about using too much man coverage. You can't be predictable when you're playing a team like Alabama with an offensive staff like they have with Caleb DeBoer and company. But I like the zone stuff, certainly the matchup zone stuff as well. All right, moving along here, guys. We're getting towards the end. I got 2 keys for the Georgia defense against this Alabama offense, trying to limit them enough to get out of Tuscaloosa with a win. Number 1, create negative plays. That's important in every game, obviously, yes. But in this game, I think it takes on even added importance. What makes Jalen Milroe and the Alabama offense so dangerous, in my estimation, is the conflict that they put defenses in on a consistent basis when they are playing on schedule. Because they can run the football, they can throw the football vertically down the field, they put you in a lot of conflict. You have to account for a lot of different things, a lot of different ways that they can hurt you with explosive plays. But how do you eliminate that type of conflict they put you in with the quarterback run game and their vertical passing game? You put them behind the chains. When you put them behind the chains, now all of a sudden, you don't have to worry as much about the design QB run game. Now, you still have to worry about Jalen Milroe scrambling, but the design QB run game, you take that out of the equation to a large degree. So you need to put them behind the chains. How do you put them behind the chains? You create negative plays. And we talked about this earlier. They are 11th in the SEC right now in sacks allowed. They're 8th in the SEC in tackles for loss allowed. So they're kind of right there in the middle. They are allowing quite a few negative plays. They also, going back to the penalties, commit a lot of penalties. That can also be effective if that trend continues and putting them behind the chains. Now, they've been able to get away with being behind the chains against South Florida and Western Kentucky and Wisconsin. But Georgia's a different level of defense, guys. I think Georgia has one of the best defenses in the country. I think through 3 games, I'm ready to say that. It has been a dominant defense. Still has not given up an offensive touchdown all year. All year, okay? So this Georgia defense is a different animal. If we put them behind the chains on a consistent basis, I think that we're going to have a lot of success limiting what this Alabama offense does, okay? And then finally here, the second key to the game for this Georgia offense, or the Georgia defense against this Alabama offense, is limiting explosive plays. I've explained it numerous times today. Alabama thrives on the explosive play. This offense does. You have to force them to string together long drives. I say it all the time here on this podcast. I've been saying it for years. As a defensive coordinator, from a big picture standpoint, what are you trying to do with every game plan that you put together for an opposing offense? You're trying to make them play left-handed. You cannot allow them to beat you doing what they do best. If they're going to beat you, you have to force them to beat you doing something that's not their forte, right? Force them to play left-handed. And how do you force Alabama to play left-handed? You force them to grind out and sustain long drives. That's what you have to do. You cannot give the explosive plays. You cannot get into a scoring contest with them. I don't think that's in Georgia's favor here. Because here's the other thing too, guys. Beyond just like explosive plays, especially when they're at home and gets the crowd going, If you force Alabama to have to try to grind out 9, 10, 11 play scoring drives on a consistent basis, chances are with their penalty situation and the number of sacks and tackles for loss that they give up and Jalen Milroe's propensity to make mistakes at times, still learning how to play that position, chances are somewhere along the way, they're going to make a mistake that will stall out that drive. You can force Milroe into a mistake. Their line's going to give up a sack or a tackle for loss if you have to string out 11, 12 play drives. The odds just say it, guys. That's what the odds say. That's what the numbers say. So it's critical for this Georgia defense to not give up explosive plays against Alabama. Now, that's what they do. So will they create a couple plays of 20-plus yards? Probably. Odds say yes, but we have to limit that. We have to make that the exception and not the rule in this game, all right? Critically important that Georgia limits the explosive plays from this Alabama offense. And finally, guys, wrapping things up here today, one prediction. I'm saving the full-on game prediction for our final episode of the week. That's going to be on the audio side only. That's going to be a podcast exclusive. So if you're watching this on video, make sure you check out the podcast and for our final prediction. But I do have one prediction as it pertains to this Georgia defense versus this Alabama offense. It's Jalen Walker, guy. It's Jalen Walker. Jalen Walker is the guy, okay? I've been raving about this guy since last year. Spent all offseason telling you that our coach had to find a way to get this man on the field with more consistency, and they've done it. They saw the same things I saw. They saw the light. The man's been on the field a lot, and he has been a force to reckon with. I believe after this game, Jalen Walker will be a household name across the country. He's already a name that Georgia Bulldog fans know. If you're a Bulldog fan, you know this guy. You have to, right? But by and large, national fans, I don't think they quite know who Jalen Walker is yet. I think that changes after this game on the big stage against Alabama. With how they have some issues protecting the passer, I still don't think they're elite at tackle in terms of pass protection. They're good in run blocking. Pass pro, they have some issues. Jalen Milroe's propensity to take sacks. I think Jalen Walker will have 2+ sacks in this game. I think that he will announce himself as one of the premier pass rushers in the country. I already believe that he is. I think nationally he will be perceived that way after this performance. I think he's a Jalen Milroe kryptonite. With that athleticism and his ability to rush the passer and also just straight up run. Now, is he Jalen Milroe level fast? Not quite that. I think he's got 4.4 type speed, guys. I think that's what he's going to run at the NFL Combine. I think he has future first-round NFL draft pick type potential as early as next year. But I told you guys a million times in the offseason, this man only played 12 snaps against Alabama last year. Borderline unforgivable. I love Kirby Smart. I love Glenn Schumann. Trust those guys almost implicitly. That was almost coaching malpractice. He was our most disruptive defensive player last year. We needed a guy that could disrupt Alabama's defense or offense last year. We didn't play him much at all until the second half because we were way too passive. Let him loose in the second half, and he made some plays. Had a sack, had a couple more quarterback pressures and hurries. He's playing more this year, and I have a strong feeling he'll play 50% plus of our snaps this game. That's what he's done all year. If that is the case, with Jalen Walker playing more than 12 snaps, which is, oh, God, I still can't quite wrap my head around that last year. I think he's going to give Jalen Milroe fits. I think he will announce himself to the country at large, the college football fan base around the country, and he will become a household name. So remember that name, Jalen freaking Walker. But all right, guys, that's all I got for you today. Again, if you missed our first part of this Alabama-Georgia preview, make sure you go back and check that out. Thank you so much for being here, guys. If you enjoyed this content, if you're a diehard Georgia fan looking for in-depth Georgia football coverage like this, make sure to subscribe to this channel right now, like the video, comment, and definitely check out the Glory UGA podcast, wherever you get your podcast, for a whole lot more coverage just like this. But thank you, guys. I'm Tyler, and as always, go Dogs!
Man, is there going to be some property destroyed tonight. 26-21. Dogs on top.